Richard and I have agreed to something unusual as far as debates go. We really care about each other. And so this isn't about scoring gotcha points tonight. It's just two good friends testing ideas side by side in front of all of you. So it's not a big deal. And here's the deal. I know Richard cares about me, and he knows that I care about him and that I want the best for him. So neither of us are here to defeat the other guy. So I'm sorry if you came here looking for a fight. It could happen, but I don't think it's going to. Instead, we simply want truth and love to guide this conversation as we compare and contrast our opposing views. So tonight, my dear friend and I are going to debate in love an important question. Does the Christian God exist? That is to say, is it more rational to believe in Christian theism over any other worldview? I believe that it is. Now, that's not just an academic curiosity. If the Christian God exists, then every person in this room was created on purpose and for a specific purpose. But if God doesn't exist, then we're nothing more than cosmic accidents with no objective purpose, ultimately just fleeting and meaningless sparks eventually swallowed up by a mindless and indifferent universe. Well, I think that we're more than that. In fact, I believe that Richard is much more than that. And that's one reason why I love the guy so much. So instead of just rattling off arguments tonight, I want to frame this simply. If the Christian God exists, what would we expect to find in the world around us? Well, there's far more evidence that we could discuss tonight. For the sake of time, I'm simply going to focus on 4 things that we would expect to find if the Christian God exists. And not coincidentally, these are exactly what we do find. First, if Christianity were true, we would expect to find scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. For centuries, many atheists assumed that the universe was eternal. But modern science has upended that, from Einstein's equations to Edwin Hubble's telescope to the discovery of cosmic background radiation to the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem of 2003, blah, blah, blah. Every line of scientific evidence points to the same thing. The universe, all of nature, matter, time, and space began to exist. Think about that. Time, space, and all matter had a starting point. It had a birthday. Cosmologists call this the Big Bang. But the universe cannot create itself if it doesn't exist in the first place. That's not just scientifically impossible, it's logically incoherent. Things don't just pop into existence from nothing. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. In simpler terms, whatever has a birthday has parents. And the universe began to exist. The universe had a birthday. That means there must be a transcendent cause beyond time, space, and matter. And that's exactly what we'd expect if the Christian God exists. Here's how the argument looks formally. Premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. There we go. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, great. Well, what kind of cause? Well, the cause of all nature must be, by definition, supernatural, something other than nature. The cause of all matter must be immaterial and spaceless, since matter can't exist apart from space. And the cause of all time must be timeless, without beginning, eternal. And since nothing happens in timelessness, unless the timeless entity has free will to choose to create or not create, then the cause of the universe must be personal, because only persons have free will. Now notice, I don't have a Bible up here with me right now. I have not touched a Bible to reach these conclusions. By simply thinking logically about scientific data, we can rationally infer that the cause of the universe is a supernatural, immaterial, timeless, eternal, and personal being with free will. That sure sounds a lot like God, the God revealed in the Bible. If Christianity is true, we'd expect logical reflection on scientific evidence to point toward God, and we have that. If atheism were true, we wouldn't expect to have what we have. Second, if Christianity were true, we would expect to find not only moral awareness in humans, but a deeply ingrained sense of moral obligation, grounded in objective purpose, empowered by free will, and followed by accountability. We would expect humans to recoil at injustice, believe that sacrifice for others is good, and believe that love is not just a feeling, but a moral duty, a choice. That's exactly what we find. Let's start with the famous line from Chief Justice Robert Jackson, the lead prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis. There is a law above the law. This transcendent standard, which the world recognized was true, was used to convict the Nazi leaders, not based on the laws of Germany at the time, but on a higher moral law that they were obligated to obey and free to disobey. The verdict assumed three things. One, an objective moral law exists that's true for all people, regardless of personal or cultural opinions. Two, that humans are morally obligated to obey that law. And three, that humans have the free will to either obey or disobey that law. But here's the rub. These three pillars only make sense if God exists. If humans were not created on purpose and for a purpose, then there is no objective purpose or moral standard to align with. If all of our thoughts and actions are determined by non-rational, mindless forces, then moral freedom is an illusion. And if there are no ultimate consequences for moral behavior, then moral accountability collapses. This leads us to a moral argument for God's existence. Premise one, if God does not exist, objective moral obligations are illusory. Two, objective moral obligations are not illusory. Three, therefore God exists. Let's clarify with an expanded argument, one that I call the ultimate moral argument. Premise one, if God does not exist, then humanity is an accident of nature and completely determined by nature. Two, if humanity is an accident of nature and completely determined by nature, then there is no objective purpose to human existence. Humans have no control over their behavior, and there are no ultimate consequences for human behavior. Three, if there is no objective purpose to human existence, humans have no control over their behavior, and there are no ultimate consequences for human behavior, then objective moral obligations are illusory. Four, but objective moral obligations are not illusory. After all, Chief Justice Jackson was right. There was a law above the law in which Hitler and the Nazis were supposed to adhere. They had the power to adhere, but they failed. They were guilty. 5, conclusion. Therefore, there is an objective purpose to human life. Humans have control over their behavior, and there are ultimate consequences for human behavior. 6, therefore, humanity is not an accident of nature and completely determined by nature. 7, therefore, God exists. Now look, if you disagree with this argument, you're left with the uncomfortable position of denying that the Nazis were properly convicted at Nuremberg. Sticking up for Nazis is an extremely heavy price tag. Don't recommend it. Now for my friend Richard, a former U.S. Marine, thank you, and a man who has devoted his life to Homeland Security, to protecting us, and the protection of human objective and unalienable rights, well, that's a costly claim and a heavy price tag, because America is based upon the foundation that logically grounds objective human rights. Maybe you've heard of it before. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if atheism is true, then Richard's entire life's work has been aimed at defending an illusion and a lie. There are no objective or unalienable human rights unless we were created by a God who endowed us with value, purpose, freedom, and moral worth. So consider the Declaration of Independence argument. Premise 1, if God does not exist, then the Declaration of Independence is false, and humans do not possess objective and unalienable rights which ought not be violated by anyone, including governments. 2, the Declaration of Independence is true, and humans do possess objective and unalienable rights which ought not be violated by anyone, including governments. 3, therefore, God exists. Let's say it bluntly. If racism is really wrong and humans have the power not to be racist, then God exists. If rape, murder, and genocide are really evil and humans can refrain from doing them, then God exists. Atheistic naturalism gives us no objective moral target, no free will to choose to aim at one target or another, and no reward or punishment based on how we aim. Christian theism, however, gives us all of these: purpose, power, praise, and punishment. Purpose. We were created on purpose and for the specific purpose of love. Power. We are able to love or not. Praise and punishment. Our love, or lack thereof, matters forever. We will be praised or punished for how we choose to live now. That's why the Nuremberg trials were not just a mere moment in history. They were a window into moral reality. And that reality only makes sense if God exists, and more specifically, if the God revealed by Jesus exists. So the next time someone tells you that atheism can account for objective morality, ask them, can it account for objective purpose, for free will, and for ultimate accountability? If not, then it cannot support a moral universe in any robust sense. But Christianity can. That's what we'd expect if Christianity were true, and that's exactly what we find. Third, if Christianity is true, we'd expect to have real freedom, the kind of free will required to think rationally and infer truth about ultimate reality, what we call metaphysics. Here's the problem for atheism. If naturalism is true, then everything we think and do is ultimately determined by the blind motion of matter. That is to say, as C.S. Lewis noted, if all is determined by the laws and events of nature, then reasoning is something that happens to us, not something we do. Blind and mindless physics doesn't care about metaphysical truth. Again, our beliefs about ultimate reality. And yet, on atheism, it would seem to control every thought and belief that Richard or I have ever had about metaphysics, like God exists or atheism is true. But if all of our metaphysical beliefs are determined by non-rational, mindless forces that know nothing about metaphysics and don't care if we do either, then why trust any metaphysical belief, including the belief that atheism is true or that Christianity is false? Christianity offers a better explanation. A personal, loving, and intelligent God gave us libertarian freedom, what I simply refer to as free will, which gives us the real ability to think, to reason, to evaluate this debate tonight and conclude, this argument makes sense and that one doesn't. That's not wishful thinking. It's the foundation of rational thought. If we weren't free, we couldn't even have this rational debate right now. Instead, you'd simply be watching a puppet show. And the puppeteer, mindless and non-rational stuff that knows nothing about the topic of debate and doesn't care if you do either. This mindless puppeteer is determining everything about you, including everything you think and believe. Here's a simple argument. Premise 1. Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is either determined by mindless stuff, determined by a deceptive being, completely random, or because Richard has the free will to think. 2. Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is not determined by mindless stuff, determined by a deceptive being, or completely random. Those are all untrustworthy sources of metaphysical knowledge. 3, therefore, Richard's belief that he lacks the free will to think is because he has the free will to think. So here's the problem for my dear friend. If he claims to possess metaphysical knowledge like God does not exist, or Christianity is probably false, or all things about humanity are determined and we don't have free will, then on atheism or robust naturalism, mindless stuff which knows nothing about metaphysics and doesn't care if he does either, determines all of his metaphysical beliefs and everything that he's going to say tonight. So if Richard is right, then Richard is just a puppet of mindless and non-rational stuff. But you see, that erases justification for Richard's beliefs about ultimate reality, which means it erases knowledge of reality, which means that Richard doesn't he doesn't know what he's talking about tonight. Sorry, Richard, that's my only zinger, sorry. On the other hand, if he admits that he doesn't possess metaphysical knowledge, then why should anyone take any of his metaphysical claims that he's going to make tonight seriously? It makes more sense to start with the assumption that we really can do what we're doing right now, that Richard can infer metaphysical knowledge, and then ask, does atheistic naturalism give Richard the tools to do what he's doing right now? No, it doesn't. But Christianity does. You see, if Christianity were true, we'd expect to be created in God's image, free thinkers, free from the deterministic grip of mere matter and physics, able to reason and know the truth about ultimate reality. You see, if the God of truth, John 14:6, desires all people to know the truth, 1 Timothy 2:4, to reason together, Isaiah 1:18, to take thoughts captive, 2 Corinthians 10:5, before bad thinking takes us captive, Colossians 2:8, so that we can know the truth about ultimate reality that sets us free, John 8:32, then we'd expect to be able to engage in metaphysics and actually gain knowledge of ultimate reality. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. You see, tonight's debate is either a mere puppet show or it's actually evidence of the existence of the God that Jesus revealed. Premise 1. If robust naturalism is true, then God and or things like God, like humans made in God's likeness, do not exist. 2. If God and or things like God do not exist, then humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense. 3, if humanity does not freely think in the libertarian sense, then humanity is never epistemically or rationally responsible. 4, humanity is occasionally rationally responsible. 5, therefore, humanity freely thinks in the libertarian sense. 6, therefore, God and or things like God exist. 7, therefore, robust naturalism is false, the most common atheistic view. And 8, the best explanation of God, things like God, and the libertarian freedom of humanity is the biblical account of reality. Finally, and most crucially, if the Christian God exists, we'd expect him to reveal himself in history. And we would expect to be able to make a case using the historical method to show that the resurrection of Jesus was a real event in the past. And that's exactly what we find regarding the historical facts about Jesus. Even skeptical historians often usually agree on certain facts. That Jesus of Nazareth was a real person who lived around 2,000 years ago. That he was crucified by the Roman government. That his tomb was later found empty. That many people then claimed to see him alive. And they were willing to die for that claim. and the epicenter of the explosion of Christianity started shortly after his crucifixion in Jerusalem, the same place where everybody saw him get killed. What's the best explanation of those facts? A hallucination? A conspiracy? Those theories collapse under scrutiny. Hallucinations like that aren't shared by multitudes of people at different times and places, and they certainly don't explain an empty tomb. Conspiracies based on known lies don't turn cowards into martyrs. So the simplest, best explanation is the one the first Christians gave. He is risen. If Christianity were true, we would expect to have historical evidence of the resurrection, and that's exactly what we have. So let this sink in. If Christianity were false, we would not expect to be able to use the historical method to show that the resurrection of Jesus was a real event in history. Thus, since a historical case exists for the resurrection of Jesus, and the best explanation of this miraculous historical event is the existence of God, a rational person is justified in rejecting atheism or any other view and concluding that Christianity is true. In fact, I contend that a rational person ought to do just that. So in conclusion, does the Christian God exist? It is more rational to believe in the God, is it more rational to believe in the God revealed by Jesus over any other view? Well, look, I've argued that if Christianity is true, we should expect four things: a universe with a beginning, an objective law above the law that humans are obligated to obey, the kind of free will that makes rationality possible, so that we can even have this debate right now, and a real event in history, the resurrection that changed the world. And that's exactly the world in which we live. If the Christian God does not exist, all of these facts demand separate, strained, and ad hoc explanations. But if he does exist, they all fall into place, like puzzle pieces snapping together perfectly. Well, tonight, I'm not just asking you to consider my arguments, I'm inviting you to look at reality itself and ask, what would we expect? What would we expect to find if Christianity were true? And do we find it? Yes, we do. Thank you.